Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Tabitha Paige. I'm so excited that you're here, and I have just loved seeing all of your eucalyptus paintings from our last tutorial. I cannot wait to see y'all kill this next one. I know you're going to do awesome. We are going to be painting my favorite flower, poppies. I love these flowers so much, mainly because of their color, their shape, and their nice translucent petals. I love how each petal lays upon the other one and creates these almost watercolor-like layers. My father-in-law actually has a ton of poppies in his garden, and I love to go visit and just sit and watch how the sun passes through the petals and creates all these layers and then different shades of the same color, which is what we're going to try to achieve today in this particular tutorial. Make sure that you check out the comment section below for any materials that I use in today's video, other recommended materials, and then all the colors that I use in this particular painting. Also, just as a reminder to make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can see all the tutorials and follow along. In this particular painting, if you do this painting within the week that it's posted, you can take a picture of your completed painting and head to my Instagram page to enter a contest. To find more details, just make sure to follow along on Instagram and you can find all that information there. Make sure to follow along anyways for any updates, any tutorials, and just to see some of my artwork. Thank you so much for being here, and I really hope you enjoy this one. Let's get started, y'all. All right, friends, I have my setup all ready to go. I have my paper with my composition sketched out. I have my water, clean water, my palette with all my colors, nice and dry and ready to go. And then I have my brushes all set, my paper towel, and then off to the side I have my smaller piece of paper towel that I use for lifting. So again, we're going to start just like we typically do with a larger brush. This is a size 8. This is my standard starting brush. You never want to start too small. You want to start broad with washes. Because our subject matter today is a poppy, we're going to start with these nice, vibrant orange reds over here. Really love this shade right here. I will let you know in the notes exactly what colors I used today. And I'm going to pull a little bit of this magenta. So this lighter layer, I'm going to make the color lean more towards this vibrant orange. I'll probably go deeper into the crimsons, magentas as we layer onto this painting. All right, remember we're going to get a nice dark, saturated with pigment starting place. Over to the side. So it's heavy with pigment. And then remember, we're going to pull a little petal of water to the middle that's slightly more saturated with water, so it's diluted. And then further down our palette, mostly water with a hint of pigment. And this is going to be our lightest layer. So it's hard to tell, but here we have more pigment to water ratio. This has a little bit less pigment, a little bit more water, and this is mostly water with just a touch of pigment. And this is what we're going to use to start our first layer. So with poppies, poppies are layers of almost translucent petals. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the illusion that each petal is overlapping. So this very first layer, we're simply going to make it one even layer. I'll show you as we go along how you can give that illusion of overlapping. But just to start, we're going to keep it simple. I may even leave some almost white areas. So when the light shines on these poppies, you can almost see straight through them, and sometimes they almost look white in some spots. If you've ever been up close to a poppy in the wild, like a field of poppies or a garden that has poppies, you'll see this. And if you hold them up to the light, you'll absolutely understand how translucent they are, which really makes it the perfect subject matter for watercolor. You notice, like in many of my other tutorials, you'll never see me just paint straight flat. I did a little bit more on this flower, and in fact, I like to lift just a little bit of that pigment up. Now in this painting, I actually got my pencil lines a little darker than I normally did. So when you do that, once you paint over your pencil lines, you cannot erase them, or it's very difficult to erase them. It's almost like the water sets the pencil lines. So if you get started on your painting and realize that, uh-oh, my pencil lines are a little bit darker, especially for a subject matter where you're leaving a lot of white space or a lot of lighter colors, then from that very beginning, you go ahead and erase some of those lines once you get your base shape painted in. You have to be really careful because you never want to erase on something that's wet still, because then it's going to get all muddled and it could tarnish and almost probably ruin your painting. So just be really careful when you do that. And like I've told you before, some pencil lines I like. But if it's too dark and outlines too much, it takes away from your painting. All right, we're gonna go in for our second layer. So in the second layer, I'm going to define the leaves a little bit more, or the petals a little bit more. Defining the petals. So we're going to create a petal right here. And when you go in for this part, you really want to make sure that this layer, the base layer, is dry enough. Because you don't want to be adding pigment onto a wet surface, because it's just going to spread out and spray into your previous layer, and then you won't get that definition. So it's doing that right here. So I'm going to give it some more time before I go in and define those petals a little bit more. This should be dry, especially since we lifted some of that paint and water up. So this is going to be a petal right here. I'm going to use the technique where I added some heavier pigment to the outside of my leaf that I've just created, and now I'm just going to add water into the center. And it's going to spread out and dry to the edges. Do the same over here. Adding pigment and then laying down some water on top of that. And then I'm going to jump to this flower over here, and let's see. Yeah, it's pretty dry. Just to make sure, I'll dab it just a touch, but it's pretty dry. And I'm going to go ahead and define some petals right here. One here, maybe one here. Clean my brush off, just pick up some water, and we're gonna blend this in. Okay. Now this is still pretty wet up here. I need to give all three flowers a little bit of time now that everything has pigment and water, pretty heavy pigment and water. So let's go ahead and jump to our stems. Like we've done with stems in the past, we're going to take our smallest brush and I'm going to gather up some green. The stem of a poppy has a fairly green, vibrant green stem. It leans on the bluer side. So we're going to add a little bit of blue. I'm going to try my ultramarine. There we go. So it just knocks back that yellow shade just a little bit when you add your ultramarine. And all you're going to do is you're going to create a light, very light layer of paint onto your sketch. Okay. We'll create some lighter areas, some darker areas. It does not have to be a perfect, straight, solid line because we're adding interest. And you'll have to remember, so anytime you're doing a painting, we're always considering your light source. So we're always thinking about where is the light coming. Because if your light source does not make sense, your painting might not make sense and read to somebody else's eye that's looking at your painting. So we're going to just imagine that the sun is just coming straight down onto the flowers, just casting light everywhere, which means the top of the stems might be darker because the whole flower is going to cast a shadow down below. And then we're going to create that edge, that darker side and lighter side later on as we define this stem. All right, I think we're pretty dry over here on this one. So we're going to jump back to our size 8 or 6, whatever you are using for your larger brush. It could be 6, 8, 10, any of the above. And I'm going to add just a touch more of this magenta, maybe even this really deep red tone. And we're going to come back over to this flower and start to define the petals just like we did earlier. I keep wanting to call them leaves. I think because I paint so much greenery, I'm so used to painting leaves. My brain does not want to say petals. I do tend to paint more greenery and leaves than I do flowers. I enjoy flowers. It's a nice change of pace. I will say that. So this is a nice little area. Watch what we can do here. Now that we've got some good color down, or some good saturated with water areas on this one, if you throw some deeper saturation, so deeper color, so we used our heavier pigment section, then you can get that nice bleed up the flower. Kind of got away from me on the right side, but that'll add some nice interest. Okay. I'm gonna leave that flower alone for just a minute. Well, one more thing. Before we head to our other flower to start defining, I'm gonna create the illusion of some leaves, or there I go again, some flower petals in the back. So we're just creating depth with a variation of colors. This will make a little bit more sense as we continue on. We're going to leave that for now. Head back over to this flower. This leaf, or this petal, still very wet, so we're just going to move around it. Okay. Again, here we can add, because it's still so wet, some pigment to the bottom of this part of the petal. Give it some nice bleed. I'll do it down here too. My favorite thing about poppies, and we'll get to this part in a minute, but I love how, so poppies have a big black center typically. Most varieties do. And I'm not showing a straight on poppy today. This is looking at it straight on from the side. But what's cool about that is because the petals are translucent, we're going to add some dark areas. So when the light shines through the poppy, you can almost see that. It's not going to be black, it's going to be a redder tone because you're looking through the petal. But we're going to add some really deep colors to the bottom of these petals in just a few minutes. And that's like my favorite part when I paint these kind of flowers. These petals also almost look like crepe paper sometimes, you know, that kind of wrinkled look. So I'm going to add some of that texture and feel where it almost looks like it's folded in areas. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and deepen this bottom area. So what I'm going to grab is this more orange tone and the magenta, and we're going to deepen it with some burnt umber right here. And a hint of ultramarine. Now I knocked it down to a pretty dark brown, so we're going to bring it back to more of the red tones. And I'm just going to just barely touch the bottom of the flower right here. While it's still wet, I'm going to add some of that bleed. I'm almost going to make it flow into this stem, because remember we talked about it's going to cast a shadow down that stem. I'm going to dry my brush off, and then I'm going to blend that into our stem. All right. We're very wet. Our page is very wet. So let's hop to our stems. And let's add some depth of color. I'm going to grab our green, our sap green. This time I'm going to grab a little bit of ochre. And then a little bit of that blue, ultramarine. That's one of my favorite colors that I use, ultramarine. It's very versatile. You can use it to create a black tone. You can deepen your greens with the ultramarine. You can make brown out of ultramarine. There's just a lot you can do with it. So this stem is nice and curvy, which I love. I love this shape of poppy stems. So you have to think that's going to create difference in color as you go down the stem. These are really starting to pop. We're to the point in our painting where things can move pretty quickly. It seems like we still have a lot to do, but actually we're closer than you think. I'm gonna made a little mistake here. I actually want this stem to go in front of these two stems. And so I'm going to I accidentally had this stem go in front. So I'm grabbing my water and I am pulling the water back and forth over that area, and it's lifting that heavy pigment away from where I laid it down. Remember, we can use our paper towel to lift it even more. And I pretty much got it up. Now I can create this, have this stem go in front of the other two. It makes more sense because this flower is on top of this stem. So it makes sense for the stem. I mean, the stem could go the other way, but we're going to do it like that. And we got to practice. I got to practice. Going back to our larger brush. Let's see, we're pretty dry. This one's very dry. Drier than the other two, so we're going to start here. All we're going to do on this layer is just deepen our poppy colors. When you look at pictures of poppies or poppies in real life, especially when they're in the sun, you can see such drastic variations. So the back leaves are almost going to be completely see-through, while these leaves closer to the front, or petals closer to the front, are going to be very dark. This one's going to overlap. These are going to be my two darkest petals. While this is still wet, I'm going to get some of my ultramarine. We're going to dot that very dark color right here, giving the illusion that we're seeing that center part of the flower. Grab some more pigment, and I'm going to give these edges up here some of that crepe paper look. Towards the edges of the petals is really where you can see that effect. So I'm going to dot my pigment onto those areas. And I'm going to come back with a wet brush and let it blend in to the background. Because these bottom layers are dry now, a really cool effect from watercolor that you can get, and we'll do more of this in a minute. Now that we have our layers of petals established, once they're completely dry, you can go back and add washes over your layers, and the definition of the petals will still be there, and you'll just be darkening the whole flower. We'll probably go there next after we do these other two flowers. Okay, this one, we're going to really deepen this petal. And this one. This is really where you can really play with your color. But you still want to keep the definition of your petals. You don't want to lose that. So just stay within each petal as you're doing some of that water play. Because if you start crossing over to different petals, they're gonna start bleeding into each other, and it's gonna get really muddled and really confusing about what is what. You'll lose that definition. Let's add our crepe paper effect, so some little lines. Add some water, let it naturally blend in. This needs a little bit of definition right along this edge. Okay. I'd like to separate these two petals out a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my water and I'm going to get my brush pretty dry, and I'm just going to push my dry brush, picking up that pigment and water, and I'm just going to leave a lighter area. You can even take your paper towel, bend it in half to create almost a line, a crease, and where you place that water, you can lift that up. And it's so dry that I can go back and define it, redefine it. So I'm bringing that petal back to the center. It was a little too wide at the base. As you all know, when you look at a flower, petals meet at a point at the bottom, and that wasn't really showing that point. It wasn't really making sense. All right, we're good there. Let's hop back over to this petal, add our definition. This one, we're gonna make a really defined petal right over here. So you can almost draw the shape in with your brush and then get it cleaned off. Just use water and dot some water on to blend it in. And then I'm going to create some almost wrinkled edges. This one has, I drew it to have rougher edges, so it does look like they're kind of crinkled and going every direction, folding, giving it that, again, that crepe paper look, for lack of a better word. And then I'm going to add some deeper tones over here, as if there's a petal kind of merging and blending in off to the side. Let's grab our deep tone while it's still wet. It's almost a little too blue. Here we go. Pull it down into the stem. All right, I feel like we've got a pretty good idea of the shapes of our flowers, where we want everything to go. This is a good opportunity to add any balance that you think you might need. So let's see, over here, I feel like there needs to be another petal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lightest light, really saturated paint, or water saturated color, and you can paint over this area and create a lighter leaf in the background. See? Creating just a little bit more balance, so it's a little bit more spread out. I like that better. And right here, just bringing this petal up. If this is dry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a wash over the entire flower. And when you do this, you're keeping all the layers that you've created, but you're just adding a little bit more color, saturation to the entire flower. But like I said, you have to wait until the entire flower is completely dry before you do anything like that. Before you add those wash layers. Let's let those flowers dry up. We're just about finished here. We're going to deepen up our stems. So we're going to add that edge to our stem, giving it a three-dimensional look. I'm going to use much more ultramarine towards the top of where the flower is. because again, it's casting a shadow. Got a little bit too dark. Here we go. Carrying that all the way down. Keeping it a little tiny bit darker on the, this time I'm going to do the right side, so I'm adding my shadow on the right side. Keeping it lighter on the left side. And this flower is going in front, and so I'm going to cast a shadow below. Same on this stem, making that top stem pop out just a touch more. So you have definition, what's on top and what's on the bottom. I don't know if you can hear Declan, but he is having a party upstairs. I think this is going to be just part of our videos together, because y'all are going to get to hear Declan throwing it down. Having a big old time. Alright, the stems are exactly where I want them. There's really nothing else I really need to do there. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add that pop right here. So I imagine there's probably some greenery. You typically see some leaves. I don't even know if you would call it leaves. But you see the greenery that kind of curls up around the base of the flower. So we're just going to give that illusion. And this is really going to make our flowers pop. Everything's still just a touch wet, so it's doing exactly what I want it to do. Just bleeding into the flower. Got that one just a little bit too dark. All right, friends. That is our ending point. One more thing. An artist's work is never finished, right? I could probably go on for a couple more hours if I let myself. I'm just using my detailing brush, and I am just simply adding a little bit more definition. Just a couple areas before we officially stop. All right, friends.